You represent nothing more than a presumptive individual of Cuban descent who frantically desires to integrate into the Caucasian patriarchal establishment the venomous accusations detonated across the expanse of the Senate banking committee inquiry chamber with the catastrophic impact of an entourage explosive device hurled into a holy sanctuary. Maxine Waters positioned herself at the testimony podium, her violet-hued blazer quivering with the magnitude of her fury, her index finger thrusting violently into the atmosphere toward Senator Ted Cruz, as though she possessed the ability to physically puncture his form with her rage. You are an elitist product of Harvard, a royal figure of Princeton. You position yourself there, feigning empathy, for the impoverished, whilst you accept financial contributions from Wall Street, hand over fist. Waters' vocal projection increased in volume and intensity. With every subsequent accusation, her supporters positioned behind her, already establishing a cadence of agreement, racist traitor, corporate marionette. Ted Cruz proceeded to slowly seal the leather-bound volume of Supreme Court precedents. He had been reviewing his physical movements, carrying the intentional precision of a gentleman who had ascertained long ago that precipitation was the adversary of positioned triumph behind his metallic-rimmed spectacles. His optical focus remained locked upon Waters, with the dispassionate objectivity of a medical surgeon analyzing a malignant tumor representative. Waters Cruz articulated his vocal tone, possessing that distinctive nasal exactness that had secured championship victories during his time at Princeton and successfully persuaded the opinions of Supreme Court justices I have presented. Arguments before the supreme judge body of our nation on 9 separate occasions. Your auditory volume fails to instill intimidation within me. Your alleged failure to inflict injury upon me. However, your felonious infractions interest me with a profound magnitude. He extended his hand toward the area below the conference table and extracted a tawny-colored, expandable file folder, the tabs of which were designated with the scrupulous attention to detail of a characteristic of a federal prosecutor. Your criminal activities are of significant interest to me. Subsequent verbalizations attempted by Waters perished within her esophagus, as Cruz deposited the dossier onto the surface of the table with the gravitational heaviness of unavoidable destiny. Every individual tab displayed a designation inscribed in his own fastidious penmanship: 1 United Family Enrichment Slate Mailers, Cuba, Files Incitement, Pattern District Abandonment. Shall we commence? A dialogue? Cruz inquired, his digits suspended hesitantly above the initial tab regarding the identity of the price sue, the individual who truly accepts currency from Wall Street. The primary tab was unsealed, with the soft murmur of parchment sliding against parchment. Yet within the sudden tranquility of the Inquisition chamber, it might as well have resonated like a clap of thunder. Cruz drains the documentation with the rehearsed comfort of an individual who had dedicated years to constructing legal arguments that would endure the examination of 9 Supreme Court justices, an individual who comprehended that veracity. When correctly represented the most catastrophic armament in any stockpile. October of the year 2008, he commenced his vocal inflection, adopting the rhythm of a prosecution, presenting a compelling argument to a panel of condemnation. The economic catastrophe is decimating banking institutions across the United States of America. Financial institutions owned by distress, which are already grappling with decades of institutionalized handicaps, collapsing at rates never before witnessed within loss. Angeles alone, 5 such organizations are teetering on the precipice of total disintegration. 5 banks that provide services to communities that are in dire need of their existence, and you, Representative Waters, in your capacity as a high-ranking member of the Financial Services Committee, possessed the authority to provide assistance to all of them. He revealed a photograph initially displaying the logo of One United Bank, glistening upon an Essenoche edifice that appears significantly more affluent than the majority of community financial institutions. 1. United Bank, located in Boston, not situated in Los Angeles, where your located voting constituency resides, nor even within California, but in Boston, a banking institution in which your spouse, Sidney Williams, coincidentally happened to possess approximately $350,000 worth of equity. The chronological sequence that Cruz established was incriminating in its exactitude. Each document substantiated the previous one, resembling evidence presented in a homicide litigation, which, in a manner of speaking, it was representing the homicide of the public confidence. September 2008. One United is served with a cease and desist mandate. From the FDIC, the bank is legally insolvent, bleeding financial resources, and confronting immediate failure due to irresponsible speculative investments and the extravagance of its executive leadership. He displays the FDIC official document, its government insignias, discernible even from the spectator gallery. The identical executives who steered the institution into ruin were compensating themselves with millions. While the bank was incinerating capital, the chief executive officer utilizing bank assets to lease a beachfront estate in Santa Monica valued at $6.4 million, along with a Porsche and a Jaguar, all occurring, while the bank balanced precariously on the verge of failure. That is incorrect. Waters attempted to interject. However, Cruz proceeded with the unstoppable force of a landslide. October 16, 2008, you individually organized a gathering between the executives of One United and officials from the Treasury Department, not a gathering intended for all minority-owned banks, as you subsequently meaningfully, but a gathering explicitly designed for one. United here is the electronic mail correspondence. He distributed the emails like playing significant cards in a losing gamble treasury. Officials articulating apprehension regarding the appropriateness of the gathering. One United executives boasting about their relationship with Waters, and most incriminating an internal Treasury memorandum, stating this appears to constitute an unambiguous conflict of interest. Representative Waters is lobbying for a specific bank in which her husband maintains a financial interest. December 2008. 1. United obtains $12 million in TARP funding, currency bailout resources intended to equilibrate the entire financial infrastructure. Cruz's voice solidified with authentic indignation. Are you aware of the quantity of minority-owned banks that submitted applications for TARP funding were rejected? 17. Do you understand how many who have been rescued with that sum of $12 million? 5 banks, providing services to extend from Watts to Compton to Inglewood. However, they did not possess a congresswoman with a spouse listed on their shareholder register. A commotion in the spectator gallery directed focus towards a gentleman in his 60s, attired in the modest suit characteristic of a lifelong civil servant. He rose gradually, as though the burden of the years had ultimately become too substantial to endure. My appellation is James Patterson, he stated, his voice conveying the solemnity of a confession. I served as a Treasury official in the year 2008. I was present at that gathering, Representative Waters. I contacted me personally on 3 separate occasions. She asserted it was regarding assistance for all minority banks. However, she only lobbied for a single one. When I voiced apprehensions regarding the conflict of interest, I was sworn to exercise greater political cognizance. I have lived with this burden for 17 years, and I could no longer remain mute. Well, I express gratitude for your bravery, Mr. Patterson, Cruz remarked, then swiveled back towards Waters, whose facial expression had transitioned from indignation through bewilderment to something resembling terror. However, the narrative does not remain at that point, does it? Because United did not utilize that $12 million to assist struggling homeowners or small commercial enterprises in minority communities would emphasize you desire to know how they utilized it. He revealed banking records that were highlighted and annotated with the exactitude of forensic accounting executive bonuses, totaling $1.8 million. The identical executives who steered the bank into insolvency compensated themselves with taxpayer currency, luxury acquisitions for the enhancement of the bank's image totaling $2.3 million, new corporate aircraft, renovated offices, entertainment expenditures, while actual lending to the community increased by zero. Not a single additional dollar was directed to assist the communities you purported to defend. The Ethics Committee exonerated me. Waters finally succeeded in interjecting her voice devoid of its previous vigor. The Ethics Committee was in error. Cruz responded with the tranquil assurance of someone asserting that water is liquid, and I possess the capability to substantiate it. Because what the Ethics Committee did not possess was this. He revealed the collection of documents, these bearing dates that were more recent, spanning from 2019 through 2023. 1. United Bank political donations totaling $247,000 to your electoral campaigns and associated political action committees. Your husband's equity, which ought to have been valueless when the bank collapsed, is now valued at $1.2 million courtesy of that taxpayer bailout in the state of Texas. Representative Waters, we refer to that as larceny committed. With a fountain pen, the interrogation chamber had metamorphosed from a stage of political theatrics into something more similar to a court of law, with Cruz acting as the prosecutor, the evidence serving as his witness, and Waters appearing increasingly like a defendant who had just understood that her attorney had deceived her regarding her probability of success. However, United was merely the commencement, Cruz stated, sealing the initial section and shifting his hand to the second tab, because once you understood how effortless it was to monetize your congressional position, you transformed it into a family enterprise. Shall we engage in a discussion regarding how your daughter Karen has accumulated $1.2 million from your electoral campaigns? George, the second tab, revealed its contents with the identical exactitude as the first. Yet these documents possess a distinct gravity representing the banal, the wickedness of corruption, disguised in the tedious attire of campaign finance reports. Cruz manipulated them with the revulsion of someone compelled to something particularly unsavory, yet essential. Karen Waters. He commenced elevating a photograph of a middle-aged female who bore an undeniable resemblance to the representative of your daughter. A gifted woman, I am certain sufficiently gifted in reality, that she has been compensated $1.2 million over the course of 20 years for providing a solitaire service to a solitaire client, your election campaigns. The stratagem, as Cruz delineated, it was breathtaking in its elementary nature and its audacity. Since the year 2004, Karen Waters had operated an enterprise named Progressive Connections, the exclusive function of which was to manufacture slate mailers for her mother's campaigns. The mailers, those lustrous cards that materialized in mailboxes, informing voters which candidates Maxine Waters supported, had evolved into a gold mine. Let us scrutinize the fair market value of these services, Cruz stated. Revealing undocumented comparison, here is what other campaigns disperse. For identical slate mailers, the average expenditure is $3,000 per mailing. Here is what your campaign disperses to your daughter, $35,000 per mailing. That represents a 100% markup. In the private sector, we would classify that as fraud. Within Congress, it appears you classify it as family values. Exhibits internal electronic mails that depict a portrait of nepotism so flagrant it would have caused a medieval sovereign to flush with shame. Campaign staff questioned the exorbitant disbursements. Karen Waters insisted on increments and most incriminating Maxine. Waters herself instructs staff to conceal the genuine nature of the relationship. From your 2018, campaign manager Cruz recited from an email projected on the monitor. Maxine whispered me to catalog Karen as a consultant, not as her daughter. She stated the FEC does not require knowledge of familial connections that constitutes consciousness of guilt. Representative that represents knowing that your actions are illicit and executing them regardless. However, the financial impropriety extended deeper than mere overpayment. Cruz revealed tax documentation that documented a complex money laundering operation. The funds dispersed to Karen Waters. They did not remain with her. They circulated through a network of shell corporations, ultimately acquiring real estate, luxury merchandise, and investments that profited the entire of the Waters family. Allow me to demonstrate to you what $1.2 million in misappropriated campaign funds acquired. Cruz stated, displaying property deeds, a $750,000 residence in Windsor Hills, acquired by Karen Waters in 2019. A $450,000 rental property in Inglewood, acquired by your grandson. In 2021, a $325,000 investment account established by your sister in 2020, all traceable back to campaign disbursements for services that cost other campaigns a fraction of the amount you paid. A female in the spectator gallery rose abruptly, her countenance flushed with sentiment. I contributed. To your campaigns, she vociferated at Waters. $25 here, $50 there. I am an educator. I believed I was endorsing someone who struggled on our behalf. You utilized my currency to purchase a house for your daughter. The security personnel advanced towards her, but Cruz elevated a hand. Permit her to speak. She possesses more entitlement to be heard in this place than anyone. My appellation is Patricia Johnson. The woman further tears coursing down her visage. I teach in Watts. I cast my ballot for you for 20 years. I informed my students you evidence were that someone who resembled us could effectuate a difference. How do I elucidate this to them? How do I inform them? Their champion is merely another larcenist Waters. We attempted to reply, but her utterances were overwhelmed by a recording. Cruz commenced to broadcast. The audio was pristine. A telephonic dialogue between Waters and her daughter from 2021, acquired through a whistleblower within the campaign. Mother, I require another $50,000 this quarter. The mortgage on the new residence is destroyed. Do not worry, darling. We will augment the mailer budget, designate it as expanded voter outreach, or something similar. Will someone not observe who is going to? Observe the FEC? To pursue a black woman, we are untouchable. Darling, the word untouchable suspended in the atmosphere like a malediction finally coming due. Cruz permitted it to now reverberate before proceeding, his voice conveying the virtuous indignation of a prosecutor facing corruption. Untouchable. He reiterated, you believed being a black woman in Congress rendered you untouchable. You weaponized your race and gender as barriers for your crimes. Every occasion someone interrogated your finances, you scream, racism. Every occasion someone, your corruption, you alleged sexism. You transformed the legitimate struggles of millions of Americans into your personal exemption card. And he revealed a compilation of declarations Waters had articulated over the years, each one subsequent to a revelation of financial impropriety, racist assault, following the One United scandal, sexist persecution following inquiries regarding her daughter's payments right, wing conspiracy. Following every investigation, do you understand who you truly harmed? With this Cruz, inquired his voice, descending to a conversational pitch that somehow conveyed more gravitas than shouting every honorable black woman in politics who is now compelled to labor twice as hard to be trusted, because you admitted America that some will utilize their identity as a shield for corruption. Every valid claim of racism that now is received with skepticism because you cried wolf while you're bought. The hand was inside the register. He sealed the second folder with intentional finality. However, the family conspiracy scheme was merely the appetizer. The substantial currency originated from your innovative methodology regarding campaign finance. Your slate mailer operation that would render a mafia protection racket look legitimate. Shall we scrutinize how you have extorted $5 million from California politicians? The third section of Cruz's accordion folder, distended with more documents than the previous two combined, suggests the profoundness of the investigation necessitated to decipher what Cruz was about to describe as the most innovative corruption scheme in contemporary American politics. He extracted the initial batch of papers with the caution of someone handling toxic refuse. The slate mailer Cruz commenced holding up one of the glossy cards for the gallery to witness a simple concept. Trusted politicians endorse candidates, and those endorsements are dispatched to voters. It has been a staple of California politics for decades, however. You, Representative Waters, you transformed it into something else entirely. You transformed it into a protection racket that would render the Gambino family proud. The mechanism, as Cruz elucidated it, was elegantly corrupt. Unlike other politicians who might endorse candidates based on shared values or policy positions, Waters had monetized her endorsements with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 corporation candidates who desired her endorsement and more significant goals to evade her opposition. They were compelled to pay to be included on her slate mailers. The payments ranged from $5,000 for minor local candidates to $45,000 for said offices. However, here is where it becomes intriguing, Cruz stated, revealing a spreadsheet that resembles the ledgers of a criminal enterprise. These are not campaign contributions, which would be subject to limitations and disclosure requirements. These are payments for slate mailer services, a completely legal loophole that you have exploited to accumulate unlimited funds from unlimited sources. He displayed the figures year by year. 2016, $280,000. 2018, $385,000. 2025, $100,000. 2022, $625,000. The progression demonstrates an expanding operation in both sophistication and audacity. However, you were not content with merely selling endorsements. Cruz continued. You transformed it into extortion. Allow me to introduce evidence from former Assemblyman Robert Chen. A video broadcast on the screen. A man in his 40s, clearly anxious but resolute, speaking to what appeared to be FBI investigator I was campaigning for. Re-election in 2020. Chen stated on the recording, Maxine Waters' associates contacted me. They stated I could be included on her slate mailer for $25,000. I declined. I did not possess that amount of money, and, honestly, I did not believe I required her endorsement 2 weeks. Later, she endorsed my opponent. However, that was not sufficient. She dispatched a special mailer designating me an enemy of the black community and an instrument of white supremacy. I am Taiwanese American. I had voted with her on every civil rights issue, but I did not pay, so she attempted to destroy me. Mr. Chen lost his election by 312 votes. Cruz noted post-election polling demonstrated that Waters' attack mailer was the decision factor 1. Politician career destroyed because he refused to pay your protection money. However, Chen was not alone. Cruz confessed after testifying from California politicians who had strengthened the identical choice: pay Waters or face her wrath, a Latino city. The councilman who was labeled anti-black after refusing to pay a black female mayor, who was called a traitor to white interests after declining to participate. Even progressives who shared Waters' supposed values were not immune if they did not pay the toll. Allow me to demonstrate where this money truly is went, Cruz stated, returning to the financial documents. The slate mailer payments go to your campaign. From there, they follow a now familiar path. Your daughter's company obtains contracts to produce the mailers at that 100% markup. We discuss the profits flow through the shell companies, and eventually he revealed real estate documents, investment statements, luxury purchase receipts, a $4.5 million mansion in Hancock Park. Not in your district. Of course, you have not resided in your district for decades. A portfolio of rental properties worth $3.2 million. A collection of luxury automobiles, all paid for with money extorted from California. Politicians who merely desire to serve their communities without paying your toll. However, the most damaging component, Cruz stated, revealing a new set of documents, is who else was paying, because it was not merely candidates who required, and your endorsements. Allow me to show you the corporate sponsors of your protection racket. The list read like a who is who of industries with business. Before the Financial Services Committee, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, J.P. Morgan, Chase Goldman Sachs each had paid substantial sums for slate mailer inclusion that had nothing to do with any actual campaign. Exciting how these payments are favorable treatment. In committee, Cruz observed, Wells Fargo paid $75,000 in 2019 just before you assisted in killing stronger penalties for their fake account scandal. Bank of America paid $100,000 in 2020, right before you opposed breakup legislation. It is almost as if they were purchasing something other than slate mailer space A. A young man in the gallery stood up, his entire body trembling with rage. My name is Marcus Thompson. I ran for Los Angeles City Council in 2022. I am a Democrat. I agree with Representative Waters on almost every issue. However, I am also a high school teacher, and I could not afford her $30,000 fee. She not only endorsed my opponent, she called me a false, progressive, and a danger to the community. I lost by 147 votes. My crime being too impoverished to pay her bribe. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Cruz gently stated. Your courage in speaking out is commendable. He turned back to Waters, whose countenance had progressed from anger through fear to something approaching desperation. This is what you have constructed, Representative Waters, a political machine that crushes anyone who will not pay tribute. You have transformed democracy in California into a transaction where the price of participation is whatever you decide to charge. However, Cruz was not finished. He extracted one final document from this section, holding it up with particular disgust. This is perhaps the most reprehensible example. 2023, Maria Gonzalez, running for school board in Inglewood. A 28-year-old teacher, first generation, American, running on a platform of improving education for children who looked just like the ones you claim to champion. She could not afford your $10,000, so you endorse her opponent. A 67-year-old incumbent with 3 driving under the influence charges and a sexual harassment settlement, he won by 89 votes. Those children in Inglewood, they are still stuck with failing schools because you valued $10,000 more than their futures. The weight of accusation hung in the air, like smog over Los Angeles. Cruz closed the third section with, The same deliberate care he had shown throughout each movement, calculated to build toward an inevitable conclusion. $5 million he extorted from politicians, corporations, and anyone else who needed to do business in your political ecosystem. However, mere corruption was not sufficient for you, was it? You had to add ideology to the mix? Shall we discuss your friends in Havana, your hero who murdered a New Jersey state trooper, the pattern of siding with cop killers over police officers, the tab bore markings that suggested fourth? This section had required special handling classification, stamps, chain of custody forms, and the kind of concern attention reserved for matters touching on national security. Cruz opened it with the solemnity of someone unveiling evidence of treason, which in his mind was not far from the truth. "Let us discuss Assata Shakur," he began, his voice carrying an edge that had not been present before. Birth: Joanne Chesimard, convicted of murdering New Jersey State Trooper Werner Forster in 1973, sentenced to life in prison, escaped in 1979. With the assistance of armed supporters who took guards hostage, fled to Cuba, where she lived to this day under the protection of the communist regime. This is who you call a hero. Representative Waters, this is who you have spent decades defending. He revealed a first photograph, Waters and Shakur in Havana, embracing like old friends, both smiling for the camera. The image quality suggested it had been taken by intelligence services rather than tourists. Your first documented visit to Shakur was in 1998. Cruz continued laying out a timeline that reads, like a dossier on a foreign agent. You have made 8 trips to Cuba. Over the past 25 years, each time you have met with Shakur, each time you have met with Cuban intelligence officials, and each time you have come back to America and advocated for policies that benefit the Castro regime. Letters the Cruz revealed next were perhaps the most damning. Evidence yet written in Waters' own hand, on written letterhead, addressed to Fidel Castro himself, allows me to read from your 1998 letter to Castro. Cruz stated, his voice dripping with disgust. Dear Comandante Castro, I write to thank you for providing sanctuary to Assata Shakur and other victims of American political persecution. Your courage in standing up to American imperialism is an inspiration to oppress people everywhere. I want to assure you that I will continue to work for an end to the cruel and unjust embargo against your nation. Victims of political persecution, Cruz repeats his voice. Rising for the first time, a woman who shot a state trooper execution style is a victim. Allow me to tell you about the real victim. Werner Forster, 34 years old, father of 2. His daughter was 3 when Shakur murdered him. His son was 18 months old. They grew up without a father because your hero put a bullet in his head. He revealed another document, a letter from Forster's widow. Now in her 80s, Cruz read it with the reverence reserved for sacred texts. Every year, on Monday, I visit my husband's grave every year. I have to explain to his grandson why their grandfather is not there. And every year I see politicians like Maxine Waters celebrating his killer. She calls Assata a freedom fighter. I call her my husband's murderer. She says Assata was persecuted. I say she was prosecuted by a jury and fled justice like the coward. She is, Representative Waters, has chosen to stand with a cop, killer over a cop's widow that tells you everything you need to know about her values. My father fled Cuba in 1957. Cruz stated his personal investment in this issue. Now evident he was washed by Batista's regime. He came to America with nothing but hope. He dishes tortured 50 cents an hour to pay for college. He achieved the American dream through hard work and determination. And you, Representative Waters, You spit on that dream every time. You praised the regime that has tortured and murdered thousands of Cubans, whose only crime was wanting freedom. However, Waters' support for Shakur was just the beginning. Cruz revealed evidence of a broader pattern of support for violent extremists' financial contributions to organizations with ties to domestic terrorism, speeches at rallies where cop killers were celebrated as heroes, a consistent pattern of choosing violence over law, revolution over reform, extremism over democracy. 2016. Cruz read from a new document you spoke at a rally for Mumia. Abu Jamal, convicted of murdering Philadelphia police, Daniel Faulkner. You called him a political prisoner and a voice for the voiceless officer. Faulkner's voice has been silent since 1981, when Abu Jamal shot him in the face. Who spoke for him? 2018. You participated in officer fundraiser for Marilyn Buck, convicted of participating in the Brinks armored car robbery that left 2 police officers and a security guard died. You called her a freedom fighter and a heroine of the struggle. Lost their fathers that day. Are they part of your struggle? 2020, you wrote a letter supporting clemency for Susan Rosenberg, convicted of possessing 740 pounds of explosives for use against American targets. You called her proactively motivated. Tell that to the people who would have died if she had not been caught. The pattern was clear and damning. Over decades, Waters had aligned herself with those who used violence against law, enforcement, and innocent civilians. He had turned her congressional office into a support network for terrorists and cop killers, using her platform to legitimize their crimes and advocate for their release. However, you did not just support these criminals with words. Cruz continued revealing financial campaign records. You supported them with money funds directed to prisoner support networks, congressional resources used to advocate for convicted terrorists, taxpayer dollars, funding your trips to Cuba. To embrace a cop killer, a man in a police uniform stood. In the gallery, his badge identifying him as a sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department. When he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. I am Sergeant David Martinez, LAPD for 22 years. I have worked in Representative Waters' district for most of that time. Every day, I and my fellow officers risk our lives to protect the people of South Los Angeles, and every day we know that their own representative stands with those who would murder us. How are we supposed to build trust with the community? When their congresswoman celebrates cop killers, Waters attempted to interject, shouting about police closing and systemic racism. However, Cruz cut her off with surgical dial, reform, precision. No one is denying that police is necessary, he stated. No one is saying that there are not serious issues that need to be addressed. However, there is a difference between reform and revolution, between accountability, assassination. You have chosen the side of those who answer. Injustice with murder. You have chosen bullets over ballots, violence over votes, terrorism over democracy. He revealed one final item from this section, a report from the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, heavily redacted, but still revealing. This report details your connections to individuals and organizations on terrorism watch lists, your communications with known terrorists, your pattern of using sympathetic resources to support enemies of the down United States. The FBI has been watching you for years. Representative Waters. They have built a case that would make any prosecutor salivate. The only reason you have not been charged is political. However, can only protect you for so long. Cruz closed the fourth section with visible relief, as if he had just finished handling something contaminated. Supporting cop killers and communist dictators would be enough to end most political careers. However, you were not content with that. You had to add, incitement to violence to your resume. Shall we discuss Brooklyn Center? Shall we talk about how you poured gasoline on a city already on fire? The fifth section opened with video evidence that required no introduction of the footage from Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. April 17, 2021, had been played countless times on news channels, dissected by pundits, and debated in forums across the country. However, Cruz presented it now with the clinical precision of a prosecutor establishing a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident on the screen. Waters appeared in the midst of a crowd already charged with tension over the police shooting of Daunte Wright. The scene was chaotic. Riots with signs, police in riot gear, forming lines, the air thick with smoke from previous night's unrest, and in the center of it all, a United States Congresswoman not calling for calm, but for escalation. We have got to stay on the street. Waters' recorded voice filled the hearing room, and we have got to get more active. We have got to get more confrontational. We have got to make sure that they know that we mean business. More confrontational, Cruz repeated, pausing to let the words sink. In a city already experiencing violence, already seeing businesses burned and lives destroyed, and a member of Congress, someone swears to uphold the law, calling for more confrontation. However, this was not an isolated incident, was it? Representative Waters? This was part of a pattern. Going back years, he revealed a compilation that his staff had clearly spent months assembling video after video of Waters at various protests and rallies, each one showing the same pattern, arriving at moments of tension and adding fuel to the fire rather than water to cool it. June 2018 narrated over footage of Waters at a Los Angeles rally. After separating yourself from your colleagues calling for civility, you told supporters, and I quote, "If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them, and you tell them they are not welcome anymore, anywhere. Create a crowd. Push back. Not welcome anywhere." Cruz repeats, this is the language of mob rule, not democratic discourse. This is incitement, not inspiring, and your words had consequences. He displayed news reports from the following weeks. Trump administration officials harassed and chased from movie theaters, confronted at their families' homes with children, disenchanted by mobs, that Complacent felt empowered by a congresswoman calls to action. However, let us return to Brooklyn Center. Cruz stated, bringing the focus back to the most egregious example, because your appearance there was not random. It was not spontaneous. It was calculated. He revealed travel, records, and financial documents that painted a damning picture. Waters had flown to Minnesota not on commercial flights, but on a charter paid for by activist organizations with a history of violence. She had been briefed on the situation by groups that explicitly called for direct action against police. She had gone not as a voice of reason, but as an accelerant. And when you got there, Cruz continued, you did not meet with community leaders seeking peace. You did not visit black-owned businesses destroyed in previous night's riots. You went straight to the most volatile location you could find and threw matches at a powder keg. The next piece of evidence made even hardened political observers wince. It was a recording from inside the Andau courtroom where Derek Chauvin was being tried for the murder of George Floyd. The judge, Peter Cahill, visibly frustrated, addressing the impact of Waters' comments. I will give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned, Judge Cahill stated on the recording. This goes back to what I have been saying from the beginning. I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function A sitting judge, Cruz emphasized that your comments could cause a murder trial to be overturned. Thinking about that, your need for a spotlight, your hunger for relevance, almost allowed a convicted pays the murderer to walk free. Is that justice? Representative Waters, is that serving your community? Technical, however, the consequences went far beyond legalities. Cruz revealed a series of photographs and videos that shows the real-world impact of Waters' incitement businesses burned to the ground. A. Vietnamese immigrants, restaurant that had been in his family for 30 years, reduced to ashes. A black-owned barber shop looted and destroyed, an elderly woman's car set on fire while she watched from her window.